So the main goal for right now is to get this truck so I can roll it onto my trailer. So obviously I can't do anything with it here at the house. I got to get this to the shop. And I can't really do anything with it the way it is now with the axle hanging out from underneath it. To get the axle located underneath this Dodge, we got to have control arms. So a couple things we could do. We could go buy used control arms from an old truck, you know, go pick an old scab of a truck and steal the control arms and track bar and other suspension components. And we could put old rusted components back on this truck. However, we didn't really want to do that. So we could also go buy stock length new control arms. And we didn't really want to do that either because when my buddy who owns this truck, when he bought it, it was already lifted. Someone had stuffed some 3-inch taller coil springs in the truck. So imagine this. This is the rear of your front fender, and this is your tire. So whenever you lift that with taller coil springs, it doesn't just, the axle doesn't just go straight down 3 inches. What happens is it actually goes down in towards the rear of the truck. So with 35-inch tires, they tend to scrub a little bit on the fender. You lose clearance. So what has to happen is, imagine that same situation, but with longer control arms, it forces that axle underneath the truck where it should be, as if you'd never changed anything. It'd be the same ratio. All right, so this is a perfect example of what I was talking about. This truck has been lifted with 3-inch coil spacers, and it's still got the factory control arms. So as you can see, it's a little tight right in here. And if you look, you can see where that tire's been rubbing whenever you turn the wheel. Now, it doesn't do that all the time. It only does that whenever I've got the snowplow hooked up to it, and it actually kind of forces that down just a little bit. So these are 35-inch tires, same setup as the Dodge that I'm working on now. As you can see, I've got the wheel cranked all the way, and look how close that is. Pretty darn close. So this truck would probably also benefit from having those adjustable, longer control arms. So the owner and I had talked about how much money we wanted to spend on this project, and obviously we wanted to try to keep the cost low, but you kind of got to spend some money where it counts, and in this case, this is where we decided to spend money. So control arms, there's going to be a new track bar that's adjustable, that's also going to be installed. We're also doing some heavy-duty tie rods that are going to be on this truck. Those will all be coming up in future videos. The other big reason we're going with adjustable control arms is obviously because of the adjustability. So this truck's been in a rollover. So the frame might be tweaked a little bit, but the thing is, we got a good alignment guy in the area that we're going to use. And with the control arms being adjustable, we could put that axle exactly where it's got to be to make it aligned with the rear axle. So long story short, guys, I do like to ramble on and on, so I try to keep these ramblings short. However, we're going to use some rough country control arms that are adjustable, and I'll show you guys the whole process. They're nice control arms. They're a little pricey, guys, but you know what? I think they're pretty strong. They're all welded. You know, they're tubular construction. They got some pretty nice joints and everything. So check this video out, and there'll be more to come. The goal for today is to get these control arms from rough country onto this Dodge. These look pretty darn beefy compared to the originals. Wow, pretty rugged. So there's 2 of each. Looks like the lower and the uppers. See if we can get those on the truck. Might be a little bit of a project, but we're going to try to take these, what's left of them, off the truck, and what's left of the axle. So we're going to start this show today, I guess, by getting rid of this old track bar. As you can see, it's kind of bent, but it's still connected to the axle, so that's got to go. I've got my trusty air tools out here. Some of you might be wondering, now wait a minute, how did you get air tools all the way out here? Well, some of my diving buddies from years ago gave me 150 feet of 3/8 air compressor line, and my air compressor is safe and sound in the garage. So I can reach out a pretty good distance, and this roll isn't even all the way unspun. So we'll get at it. I'd say that bushing was pretty well wiped out anyway. Now I think I'm going to get the tie rod off the pitman arm. Wow, that was the easiest cotter pin I've ever taken out. That one came out surprisingly awesome. Hopefully the rest of the truck goes this easy. Now the axle should be completely free from the truck. I'm going to tackle this lower control arm on the driver's side. Wow, I don't think I would have been doing that by hand, guys. Whew. Sweet. Of course, they had to use different size nuts. I wonder why they did that. Just in case you were curious, this bolt takes a 22mm with a 24mm nut. I don't know why they did this. The upper one takes a 21mm and an 18. Not quite sure why they did that, but that's what we're running into, guys. Now on the front axle, these are both 21mm. I don't get why they have all these random sockets and wrenches. Every one of these lug nuts are these locking lug nuts. So I've got to get a different tool to undo those. Picked this up down at Harbor Freight. Supposedly this kit will do just about every lock nut. So let's give it a try. Wow, quite a few different sockets in here. Looks like a pretty nice set. I guess this is Harbor Freight's premium set. So that was a good little set, I suppose. See how these hold up. The rim doesn't look too bad, but I don't believe we'll be reusing that tire. Time to get off this bent up tie rod. B likes the jack. All I've got left is that steering dampener. That tie rod assembly will come right off. Now for this track bar. Because this track bar is so bent, I can't get it out this way. So I'm going to attempt to pull this thing out this way. I don't think Dodge engineers ever imagined that was going to happen. Now, I'm not a steering and suspension engineer, but I'm fairly certain that there's a few more curves in those pieces than there should be. Now for this lower control arm to come out of there. Now this upper control arm might be difficult to get that bolt out because the exhaust right here is in the way and it might not allow that bolt to go out through. So that one might take a little bit of messing with. We'll see. This upper control arm here was the worst one to get out. This bolt, I had to loosen up the exhaust just to get that bolt to slide out. What a nuisance. I'd say that rim's pretty much garbage. Should be able to move around the axle better now without the tires on there. Got the axle pretty much underneath the truck where I want it. Now I can get the lower control arm bolts out. Finally got the lower control arm bolts out. And those were quite difficult because of the fact that the bolt was seized inside the sleeve of the control arm. I'll show you what I mean. So this is the bushing that goes inside the control arm. This is essentially this piece, and this was what was seized to this bolt. And these are eccentric bolts so that you can adjust the lower control arm. Now, I had to take this sleeve, which is the same as this one, and slice it to get that open, and then cut the rubber bushing, which is in here, to get to this sleeve, to which then I could cut a slice in it with a torch, and then use the air hammer and hammer these out. Quite a lot of work. Wasn't super happy about it, but this is a main truck after all, so we do have salt and calcium up here, and they are not easy on the roads in the wintertime. They really hammer it. They give us a lot. whoever put this truck together at some point removed the coil spring cushions. It's basically a rubber piece that sits up underneath the coil spring bucket. So I took these off. These are the spring mounts, and they were only held in with these type of bolts, so that's wrong. So I'm gonna fix that. I got some more parts on order, and that way that has to come off anyway. So I might as well take these off. I've replaced these because the shock actually pulled right through these mounts. So I figured might as well just replace those while we're right in here. So here we can see how that coil spring has been riding on those bolts that hold in the shock mount. So that's not right. We'll get that fixed. I got a new set of cushions on order. This one you can see a little bit better how that's all dent built in from where the shock got ripped out. So on this truck I'm working on, someone had installed 3-inch lift coil springs on this truck, and it's always had the factory control arms. And as a result, it kind of brought the front wheels back towards the fender of the truck, which wasn't really quite right. So we took the opportunity to buy this kit here from Rough Country. This is actually designed for a 3-inch lift kit for these trucks, and supposedly these are about, I think they're able to extend about an inch or so over what you have originally. Now the thing that's frustrating is that there wasn't any instructions included in this thing, so I have no idea really how much longer that I need to make these control arms. So to get a center to center dimension of this original control arm, I'm going to measure here on the end where this metal surrounds the bushing, and also to the front of this one, and that's going to give me 16 3/4, which is the center to center dimension if we hadn't been missing a piece. So I'm going to make the new ones roughly 17 1/4. So I'm extending about 1/2 inch on the top, and I think on the bottom I might extend roughly 1 inch. And I think that's going to do pretty darn good. But we'll have plenty of time to adjust this thing and get it all squared away. So the threads that are in the end of this tube are welded in the end of this, and they only extend about 1.5 inches into the tube. So whenever I have this new end installed, we're going to have roughly 2 inches inside the tube. So there's still going to be full thread engagement, so there shouldn't be any risk of these things being weakened by extending them a little bit. And I think that's what they were designed for these lifted trucks. So this is going to be tricky to get a dimension from this one, but this is the straightest lower control arm that I have. So I'm going to try to go from on the outside of this bushing oval, used to be round, and I'm imagining the center of that would be about 18 3/4. If we could straighten that thing out, I think that would be about 18 3/4. So that being said, this one, I believe this is the inch longer one, so I'm going to make this one 19 3/4, because that looks about right. And there's plenty of thread inside that tube at 19 3/4. So I'm going to go out on a limb and just say that'll be close enough for lining up purposes to get the front end back under the truck. So I must have got a Friday night kit or a weekend kit. They were quitting early, so they pushed this one through quality control. So this nut wants to thread on there, but it gets right there and it binds right up. So I've attempted to clean this up with a wire brush, all this powder coating that they left on the threads. This threads into the tube just fine, but this jam nut, I mean, you can't budge that thing. So I guess I'm gonna have to put this in the vise and try to run it through the threads to clean them up a little bit. So the threads are established, but they just don't really want to go easy. So it looks like I'm just gonna have to run this through this nut a bunch of times. Man, what a hassle. I mean, I don't think you'd ever do that by hand. The top ones went really great, but the bottom ones just You can see some of that paint coming off. I think it's just that that paint is too thick. The tolerances won't let it go through on the nut, but on the tube itself, it's loose enough. There's plenty of clearance in the threads. Oh well, you can see right there all that paint coming off. It's not cross-threaded, guys. It's literally such a tight fit, which is good, I guess, because you don't want that jam nut coming loose. And it's good that it's got a nice tight thread, I guess. But I just kind of imagine you spend almost $400 for a set of these control arms, and they wouldn't have the best threads in the world. That's kind of upsetting. I'm not about to call them back because these took well over a month to get. So if I call them back, they'll say, oh, we can issue you a new kit, or whatever it is. Just like, nah, it's not even worth it. I want to wait. So this is what we got to do as a result. But, you know, not a big deal, not the end of the world. Finally wound that jam nut all the way on, and look at this, guys. There's just little filings of paint. Now it's not cross-threaded at all, guys. That's not metal that you're seeing. That's literally paint, powder coating. But whatever, goes good now. Look how easy those threads go in the tube itself. It must just be a slightly different tolerance between the tube threads and the jam nut threads. Whatever the case is, it's fine. Just causes you a little extra work. I'm not going to call the guys back and make a big complaint about it. Good enough. There they are, all ready to go install them on the truck. Alright, so I'm going to attempt to put in the first control arm. See what kind of procedure this is going to be. And I'm using this copper anti-seize. This stuff is pretty darn good. And I coat all the parts with that, just so if I ever want to take this thing apart again, it'll come apart real easy. Actually, I'm going to put the nut out, because that might be easier to adjust with the tires and everything once they're in the line. We have to sneak the axle ahead just a little bit. Not ahead, I should say, to the rear. Alright, I've got the first control arm in. I'm going to leave all the bolts loose until we get all of the bolts in. Going to attempt this second side lower control arm. Use plenty of that stuff. Because I have a feeling I'm going to be taking these out again to adjust them. I don't believe they're going to be right. I'm going to have to probably mess around with them and get them close. Okay, the bottom control arm is in. Now to start working on the uppers. Had to jack the front end up just a little bit. Man. Alright, so that's all there is to it, installing these 4 links. Now, hopefully, I've got the dimensions right. Otherwise, to change these, to change the adjustment, you have to undo one end so you can unthread or thread in. It's kind of frustrating. This is a view of what I was hammering on. This right here kind of got mangled a little bit whenever the thing got in that rollover. So I just persuaded it this way so it lines up nice and it doesn't hit on the nice new control arms. Ugh. So that job took quite a little bit of time. A lot longer than I thought it was going to. But now I'm ready for the coil springs and a few other components. But in all honesty, look how thin the metal is on these original control arms. I mean, these are so cheesy. It's literally sheet metal folded around and spot welded. I mean, no wonder why these things ripped apart. I mean, these are almost 1/8 inch thick tube. I mean, those things are fairly stout. Those things, if they do, if this truck ever does get another accident, I don't think they're gonna break. I bet they'd just bend, but hopefully we don't have to find out. So look what finally came in the mail. We've been waiting probably 6 weeks for these bad boys. These coil spring cushions. That's been the only thing really holding me back from getting the coil springs in the truck. So the goal for today is to get these 2 jacks functioning so I can lift and lower the axle. And I'm going to try to get the coil springs where they belong. Alright guys, we're going to start off this show by putting the shock tower ring in first, because once we do this, it can be hard to hold this up by itself. Granted, we're going to have to take these nuts back off and install the shock tower, but for right now, we can get away without that tower on there. This piece is going to sit on top of the coil spring, and it's going to sit right up under here in this coil spring cup. A little tricky to get that in there. These are 3-inch lift coils. The 4 links are bottoming out already, so there's no physical way you can get these things any higher than that. I don't think you could install a taller coil. I mean, that's ridiculous. Oh well, we'll see how it fits once we jack it up. Funny thing about these coil springs, my buddy, whenever he got in that big accident, he was actually able to find these. They must have been rolling around the intersection somewhere, because he said he had to chase them quite a ways. Imagine what a spectacle that must have been. See, this one looks a little bit tighter than the other side. So as you can see, what's going on is that this coil spring on this side is going in real tough. I'm doing this without a coil spring compressor, because I really don't like coil spring compressors. I think if I can get this established, we might not need one. Don't laugh if it works. So, that coil spring is now in its home. So as you can see, there's quite a severe angle or a rake to the spring. Hopefully once we jack that axle up, it's going to come out to the front. I'll show you guys that. Alright guys, it's just starting to rain on us a little bit here, so I'm gonna have to quit, but check that out. That looks much better. Nice and straight. So at least the coil springs are in now. I can start getting the track bar on, the tie rods. I can start getting some things back together here. It's gonna start coming together pretty quick now, once the weight is actually on the front axle again.